I don't want to speak for all like the franchisor executives or founders out there, but I have heard from, because I've worked with emerging franchises, and I've heard that question where, hey, if you guys get big and you get bought out, like, I don't want that. I'm building this because I believe in you, and I like the agreement we have now, but if that changes, like, I'm at risk. And founders, I've heard them say, like, hey, like, we wouldn't do that. We would never let that happen. But I think money, like, for better or worse, it does change things. People will do things that they didn't say because of money. And if you're getting life-changing, I'm talking tens and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, I mean, it's hard for people to say no and think clearly in those scenarios. So you just got to be honest about, kind of that reality.
Welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
My guest today is the Wolf of franchises, and it's a great pleasure to interview you, Wolf, and I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, and want to get right into some things. Let's talk a little bit about your background. So you were in the franchise community, but nobody grows up saying, I'm going to be a franchisor or franchisee someday. Some people do that. If you're a member of the Dwyer family, a member of the Titus family, you might know very early that you're going to be in franchising, but most of us don't. I wrote a book about franchising for $10,000. I tried not to because I didn't know what it was. Best decision I made, writing that book, but I kind of accidentally discovered franchising. How'd you discover it?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me on, John.
Sure.
Pleasure to be here. And like many, it was, let's call it accidental. I had actually been working for a multi-unit franchise owner right out of college. Did not know that's what it was at the time. Let's call it a niche franchise. It was a supply house franchise called Johnstone. And it's actually largely co-op as well. So very similar model. The corporate structure is obviously a bit different than a franchise, but, license fees, paying annual fees to license the brand, things like that happen. But so that was my first exposure to it. And I mean, in reality, I fell in love with startups during my time there, and lived close to New York. So was scouring these job sites that were specific for startups. And I happened to see one that advertised a sales role, which is what I was doing at the time, for matching investors and operators with emerging franchises. And I didn't know anything really too deep about the franchise side of things, but I interviewed for that job, ended up getting it. And so, lo and behold, if we're going to speak in industry jargon, it was a franchise sales organization is what I ended up working for. So I sat at the intersection of working with franchisors and help, we would become their bolt-on franchise sales department, match franchisees with them. So I really learned a lot about both sides of that kind of relationship. And to me, if someone's looking to get started in like the franchising industry, an FSO is a great spot because you really do just see both sides of the coin and you can understand how the whole kind of flywheel works. Yeah.
So what was it that you liked so much about franchising? Sales position, the money is made in franchise development, as many of us know, not necessarily being the franchisor or working for the corporation. Development people can make a good chunk of money. Did you catch on quickly? Were you successful? And what did you like about it so much, other than the money, let's say?
Yes, and I've since left behind the lucrative development career for to be a professional tweeter and podcaster. I'd say, look, it was very shocking to me. And I remember the first big multi-unit franchise owner I spoke to. It was someone who owned, I think, 30 or 40 Orange Theories. And I got off that was like my first month on the job. So I was just doing introductory calls, and then I passed it up to my boss at the time. And I said to him, I was like, hey, this guy owns 40 Orange Theories. I was like, how do you do that? And he's like, well, you buy one and then you just keep building more. Like, that's what happens. He had been franchising for years, so it was nothing new to him. But I was just like taken aback by it because, again, very entrepreneurial, very into startups, especially at the time. And, reading all about tech startups and consuming any content I could about entrepreneurs and investing, whether it's Wall Street and things like that. And then here comes this people, every day I seem to be on the phone then from that point on with, someone who owns 25 guys or, 10 units of this brand. And they're looking to expand beyond that to a new brand, one of the ones that we were working with. Yeah. And I was just like, this is a whole new way of making money and no one is talking about it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I just became fascinated by it. And I loved the simplicity, the rinse and repeat process involved with it. And I just thought, it's definitely, it's not a get rich quick scheme, which like, I think, if I'm being honest with myself, that was part of the appeal to this tech world, at the time that I was looking into, because I mean, there's stories of tech startups that grow rapidly and scale incredibly fast because that's, the exponential nature of the internet. But franchising, it's like, okay, like it's not going to happen in 2 years, but if you just stick to the process and you pick a good brand and you do what you're supposed to do, I mean, in a decade's time, I really think like it's pretty tough. Again, the caveat, picking the right brand, but it's pretty tough to not do well if you just wait and let time do its thing and put in the work every day. So that whole thing to me was just new and it was fascinating.
So were you surprised were you talking mostly to multi-unit owners or prospects rather than the single unit, which historically we've sold franchises to single unit owners, but sounds like you were multi-unit almost from the beginning.
So we worked with a few brands in my time there, and then things shifted pretty quickly once we entered into COVID. But I'd say one of the brands was a non-brick and mortar brand. It was in the like commercial IT and like property security space. So very honestly, a bit random. That was more single unit, and it was a territory based model. So it's like, hey, you could build out a book of business in a specific territory. But we had a pet brand that was brick and mortar based, and honestly, I don't even remember how it happened. I think one of us sent a cold email, and this very successful Orange Theory owner who owned dozens of locations in America. He owned the international rights in a few separate countries. Big fish to catch for an emerging brand, right? And he loved the concept. He bought into it, and this is kind of, I'm sure, other development people can relate. If you get in with like the right network, it just seems to organically catch fire. And that's sort of what happened. We had a lot of luck with other Orange Theory operators. And it's a great thing because they have a proven track record of building units, of following a development schedule. They're well capitalized. They're not going to, the sales process is, I'm putting in air quotes, easier, right? Because a lot of first time buyers sometimes will try to, say, hey, like I want to negotiate the royalty or the brand fund. It's like, there's certain things you just simply aren't going to change, and it sets a precedent for the rest of the system. Whereas existing operators seem to know. They're like, all right, I know what is on the table for negotiation, and they're kind of on the level and already in the game, so to speak. So it was just by chance, but I did get a lot of experience with the multi-unit operators.
Okay. And you point out that it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. We're talking about franchising. And it takes a skillful and competent operator to succeed at this. Okay, so how many people did you meet who thought it was, hey, I can get rich fast through franchising. Let me buy 6 of them.
Oh, I mean, hundreds, if not thousands. The thing is
that these are people who have money, maybe $1 million to invest, and pardon me for this, but they're that stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of just that kind of when you're new to something, there's maybe a level of naivete, and I think that's it. I think a lot of people maybe are kind of like me, and maybe perhaps you before you got into franchising, right? Where you're new to it, you don't know much about it, but then you just kind of hear one little story and an anecdote, maybe like, somebody who worked at a McDonald's and now owns 50 of them and is, a multi-millionaire. And you're like, oh, this isn't that hard. You just buy some and, they run itself. And I'd say as an industry, maybe we probably don't do the best marketing of it as a whole in aggregate. I think there are probably some, let's be honest. There's a lot of people still pushing this semi-absentee bullshit. Can it develop to semi-absentee? Absolutely. But not right away. And so,
So
yeah,
it's also amazing that people know so little about franchising when it's been around since the late 1800s, but then became very popular after World War II with Dairy Queens and
yes,
McDonald's and um, other burger opportunities. And yet, if we go out on the street and we talk about franchising, um, they're going to talk about, oh, you mean the Knicks or the Dolphins or the Eagles? This is
yeah.
franchise. No, that's not what we're talking about. Business format franchising. How can so many people be so ignorant about it? That astounds me, really. As a professor who teaches it, I understand when a 18-year-old doesn't know anything about it, but I don't understand when a 38-year-old doesn't know much about it. How can that?
It's such an interesting conundrum. And yeah, that, I mean, this just the kind of like misnomer where I mean, franchises from a sports perspective, like teams are referred to with
Yeah,
that word. And then even, in Hollywood, like the
yeah,
Marvel
right.
franchise, it's brutal. And,
Yeah,
I've gotten, DMs on Twitter for people asking about that kind of stuff. And I'm like, hey, like that's a totally different, like, I don't know anything about that
yeah,
world
yeah.
of business, but I don't know, man. It's interesting. I mean, you see like, I think a lot of people just associate the word franchise with fast food, and probably McDonald's is one of the first thing that comes to their mind. But I've always referred to it as this giant hiding in plain sight, because you go to a strip mall, there's a good chance half, if not more, of those businesses in there are franchise, and most
Yeah,
people just don't even realize it.
yeah. Well, that's so true. And I've been teaching the A to Z's of buying a franchise at the IFA expos 30 some years at least. I created that course and I still teach it. I'm going to teach it in Fort Lauderdale in the next couple of days. And as recently as 10 to 15 years ago, if I had 100 people in the room and I'd say, if you're going to buy a franchise today, how many of you are going to buy a food franchise? And about 75% of the hands would go up. It's completely different today. Maybe not even 10% of the hands go up to buy food,
Interesting.
which surprises me, but at the same time, it doesn't. And this lack of knowledge that we have about franchising, well, for guys like us who write about it, who are on the internet, who are on social media, I'm in the classroom a couple times a week teaching it. I'm around the country, around the world in some cases talking about it. Thank God there is a lack of knowledge. If people already knew everything, they wouldn't need us. They wouldn't need
That's
the wolf,
fair.
and they wouldn't need the Titus Center for Franchising. So, in a way, thank God we haven't done a good job of educating. You also say, Wolf, that it takes a skillful and competent operator. And I think that you're right on the money there. But in what ways? What skills and what competencies do you need to be, let's say, the multi-unit operator successfully in franchising?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think let's, just for the kind of basics of that is, I think there's some camp of people that honestly they don't even consider a franchise owner an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
and I think it's disrespectful and, like, a lot of things. But to me, it basically, they're implying that it doesn't take a skill set or maybe even like work to be a franchise owner, because it's just, their mentality is, oh, I mean, you just, you're paying royalties, you're not actually building a business, you're just following someone else's rules, and this and that. But I mean, the reality is, it still takes significant business acumen to be able to build multiple brick and mortar businesses, or if it's a territory based model, build out a book of business in territories. So whether that's financial modeling and just understanding where is money coming in, is money coming out, knowing when to hire, knowing who to hire, building a culture, being a leader. I think a lot of franchises do a great job of teaching people how to run the business, but there's probably a gap in them teaching people how to be a business owner. Because again, that leadership, building a company wide culture. I mean, these are things that are not easy at all. So you do need to have those skills, and at the end of the day, a lot of it is almost a sales pitch. Like, you have to be a good salesperson as a part of it, right? You got to sell the franchisor that you're worth it. You got to sell your first employees that, hey, I'm a new business owner, but it's worth coming on this journey with me. You got to do some form of selling to get customers in your door, right? Whether that's via marketing campaigns or whatever. But there's a lot of skill sets. And if you don't know how to do it, you got to hire people who can help you do it. And so, yeah, it's not that simple, is all I'll say.
One of the great things about franchising is that you can learn these skills and competencies through a good franchisor and a franchise network. If you pick the right one and they educate you, it's worth more than an MBA. And if you're in that right network where other people are already doing it well, and you say, hey, can I take you to dinner? And they do. This happens all the time in good franchise networks. So you can learn these skills and competencies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the hardest thing people have to do is kind of identifying it, especially when they're super new to the space, right? There is 3,000-ish franchises actively operating at once. Yep. And so kind of figuring out which one to go with and who to trust and, just who's a resource they can trust, right? Versus someone else. And so it is out there, though. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I like the DISC personality profile. I've used it for years. It was introduced to me at the Dwyer Group, where I was on the board of directors. I worked very closely with Don Dwyer, the company now known as Neighborly. All of his children worked in the business, particularly after his death. All but one worked in the business. And so I'm very fond of that family and thankful for so much education that I got early on about franchising through the Dwyer Group and the Dwyer family. And they use the DISC profile, as do other franchisors. When I became the CEO of We Buy Ugly Houses, the founder, Ken D'Angelo, had insisted on a DISC profile for every franchisee that came through. And you made a comment that a lot of this is about sales. You got to sell yourself, first of all, to the franchisor, to convince the franchisor that, hey, I'm the one you should select, in spite of maybe some deficiencies that I might have, maybe financially, or maybe my background. But with that DISC profile, if you don't have D in your personality, you're probably not outselling yourself very well. That is something, of course, that you can learn. I wrote, yes. You can't teach a kid to ride a bike at a seminar, with the great David Sandler, the founder of Sandler Training. And we understand that there are certain things you need to do to become good at sales. But if that's not your personality, that's not where you come from, it's not what you want to do, you're not comfortable, you might not be cut out, particularly for certain franchises.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny you're mentioning DISC and Sandler, because I at the first company I worked at, that supply house, the sales manager, put me through that program when I became, a territory representative, where I was basically driving around selling our product to commercial HVAC and plumbing contractors. Yeah. But yeah, did the DISC program through a Sandler franchisee, believe it or not. So that's another example, right? The 9 out of 10 people would never know that Sandler, or 99 out of 100 would know that Sandler is a franchise. But yeah, I mean, it's a great way to kind of get an understanding of who someone is and what their tendencies are, right? But yeah, I mean, look, it would absolutely cut you out of some franchises, and I think that's an important distinction for folks to make, is that, you have to understand where your skill set lies. So there might be some franchises that aren't a good fit, but I will say, I just remember going through my sales journey, and, I wouldn't have described, and I still won't describe myself as, I always had the impression that a salesperson, at least from the male perspective, is, very charismatic, walks into the room, lights it up, can schmooze, till the cows come home. Right. And I was like, I mean, I can talk to people, but I'm not like that. I'm not like Romeo. I'm not the smoothest guy in the world. But like you said, you can learn things, and it doesn't have to be like the perfect match from a sales perspective for you to be able to get the job done.
But there's this point about understanding the personality of the franchise brand. So at We Buy Ugly Houses, for example, where I was a franchisee, but I had a partner because he was the operator. I'm not an operator. And we discovered, and when I became CEO, that the top performers, the people buying 100 houses or more every year, had D in their personality, because you had to know how to go speak to a seller, a homeowner who admittedly had an ugly house, but still wanted to get as much money out of that house as they could. And you had to show them and sell them on this idea. You're going to sell it to me at a discount, maybe a considerable discount. Well, you couldn't do that if you didn't have D in your personality. And the bottom 25 franchisees, who were the troublemakers, they didn't validate. They thought we were crooks. They couldn't buy a house, or they bought maybe 6 a year. They had no D in their personality. So to me, this is where light bulbs went on for me early on, saying, wow, it's not only your personality that matters, it's the personality of the brand. If you're in the senior care business, don't worry so much about being a D. Worry more about those S and C personality traits where you're comforting, you take care of people, you're a good listener, you look at the details, you pay attention. You don't want a doctor who's not a C, who's all D, and he's going to operate on your head. You don't want that. You want that C personality. So I realized that early on. I give the disc to all of my students, and anyone who calls me says I'm interested in franchising. Say, listen, the first thing you need to do, just go do a disc profile. I give it to people free because it's so easy to do, and it's a great indicator. So I like that a lot, and I think we're on the same path that, yeah, you've got to pay attention to these kinds of details before you invest all your money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing yourself, knowing your limitations, your personality is critical, and DISC does a great job of just giving you an understanding of that. And I think another thing to add to that beyond the DISC is understanding what kind of entrepreneur you want to be, because there are people who maybe they're good entrepreneurs, could be talented operators, but they're not a fit for a franchise because they're just not going to be able to handle having someone else at times tell them what they have to do.
Exactly.
And so all these things. Yeah, exactly.
And that's a great segue, because earlier you had mentioned, people don't even consider franchisees entrepreneurs. And I'm a firm believer that the higher you are on the entrepreneurship scale, in my first book about franchising, which changed my life, Franchising the Inside Story, I got an entrepreneurship scale from Wharton. And if you scored high on that, you probably weren't going to be a good franchisee. You might be a great franchisor. You're creative. You're willing to take risks. You'll go out there and do things. Okay, well, if you're at that end and you always want to look under the hood to figure out how does this work and can I make it work better? No. That's not the job of a franchisee. So we don't want you to be as entrepreneur. When franchisors say, I'm looking for a few entrepreneurs to become my franchisees, okay, you're headed for a big storm. You don't know what's going to happen to you, because entrepreneurs, the high entrepreneurs, they're entrepreneurial. They don't want to follow a system. I'll let you comment on that, and then we'll come back to something else you said.
No, I completely agree. I think the most, I don't know if it's the right way to say it, the most talented entrepreneurs, but I agree with you that the more creative and that entrepreneur building type of spirit you have, it absolutely becomes something where, as you said, right, it's you should be better off maybe trying to create your own franchise versus just, there are folks who they're going to do the work, they're disciplined, right? They're going to show up every day and follow the playbook. But if you're that creative type, you want to build your own brand, you want to come up with your own marketing strategies and test different things. That goes against the grain, and it really goes against why you buy a franchise. So it's not a good fit. It's not a good use of your money if you're that type of person. Yeah. You'd be better off trying to start your own type of business. And so, yeah, I completely agree. It's a funny just kind of juxtaposition, because then you have folks, to cherry pick one of the best, Greg Flynn, who, built just a ridiculously massive portfolio of franchises. And he's obviously an incredible operator in the restaurant realm, and his team is fantastic. But he even says it. I asked him when he was on my podcast. I was like, "Hey, would you ever start your own franchise?" Because he's got his portfolio is over $4 billion, so he's got easily enough side money if he wants to just spin up a few projects, right? And he's like, Wolf, honestly, I'm not. That's just not me. He's like, I love someone else doing that work for me. I just want to build the restaurants and run them. Yeah. And it's just funny. It's just that it's the personality type, and he knows what he's best at, and so he's stuck to it.
Yeah. So on this topic of franchisees aren't entrepreneurs, business schools are filled with professors and deans and leaders who say Franchising is not business. Franchising is Mickey Mouse. Somebody gives you a system and you just follow it. It's copycat. That's not real business. Fortunately, that has changed, but not until recent years. Now we have a half dozen universities that are offering franchise programs like the Titus Center for Franchising at Palm Beach Atlantic University. But we didn't always have that. And there are many deans on the record talking about franchising where they say that's not what we teach. That's not real business. Well, how wrong they are, of course. And when we hear about the tech companies and startups, people don't realize most of them are going to fail. If not in the first year, within 4 or 5 years, they're not going to exist. And in franchises, there are some franchises, as we know, that have an outstanding track record of their franchisees not only surviving, but succeeding massively so. Business schools have missed this traditionally, and it's probably part of the reason why people know so little about franchising. They don't get to study it.
I'd agree. And yeah, I mean, there are some really amazing franchises. It's funny you mentioned that because I'm actually doing like a deep dive on Culver's, who, they have 900 plus locations and have been franchising since the 80s. And they've only closed 2 locations their entire existence of franchising. So phenomenal success rate. And so goes to show you again, back to like picking the right brand, right? If you're considering or you want to own a business, I mean, and let's say you want to open a burger shop. If you start on your own, it's a lot riskier than buying a Culver's. Like we can say that for damn certain. Yeah. And it's been exciting to see kind of the universities get more involved. And I think honestly, this search fund and entrepreneurship through acquisition movement is a big part of it. As I think folks are starting to realize that, trying to acquire a bunch of independent small businesses with different brands, different teams, different tech stacks, while it sounds good in the boardroom, it might not be as easy in practice. And then you have franchises where if you start building franchise locations of the same brand, right? Same brand, same playbook, same tech stack. It's all unified. It's rinse and repeat. And I can get that sense, especially from the folks at Yale who we were talking about that before the podcast started. And there's a lot of people who are excited about just the possibilities within the franchising realm.
So at one point, you realized that financial transparency is lacking in franchising, and nobody knows for sure how many brands are out there. Supposedly, we get a new one every day introduced in North America. So maybe we have 4,500 or on the way to 5,000, and probably several, maybe 3,000 of them are really actively out there looking for franchisees. But did the lack of financial transparency bother you to the point that you said, I want to do something about this, and part of the reason why you became the Wolf?
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of twofold, and that was one of the big reasons. Is that I just thought, I mean, you have all these. I mean, I guess to back up and go back to where I said I really learned about franchising, which was at the franchise sales organization. I had franchisees who, if they weren't interested in one of our, 3 to 4 portfolio brands, it was kind of it. I couldn't sell them anything else. And so they'd often ask me, hey, where can I go just to do objective research? Like, I don't want to talk to salespeople anymore. I just want to research. And I never really had a great answer for them other than state websites to scour FDDs. And on the flip side, right, I was helping our company try to find emerging franchises to partner with. So I was going through the research process too at times. And it was mind boggling to see all these franchises that don't share any performance representations in their FDD. Yeah. And I just thought, if you're going to go out there and effectively productize your business, sell it as an investment for hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, it was the craziest thing to me, and still is, frankly, that there is no regulatory requirement to disclose some level of performance annually, which, with the technology today, it's very easy to do. Just, export your point of sale data and compile an average revenue at a minimum. Yeah. There's no excuse to not be able to do that. And so, it bothered me because I just think there should be some, onus and some responsibility put on the franchisor side. So that's why I started the newsletter where I share FTD screenshots. I only talk about brands that do disclose financials. So it's kind of a nice cycle there where, in a way I like it because I get to kind of reward the brands that are trying to be transparent with some coverage and promotion. And it, doesn't come at a cost to them. It's just independent research.
So one of those, to me, amazing things, again, about franchising. When I got involved in franchising, I wrote Franchising Inside Story early 1980s. And within 2 or 3 years of doing so many phoners on radio, and where they introduced me as the world authority on franchising because I had written a book. That always works like a charm. You write a book and the media, it's fake news, but you can put that, and I didn't really know how to put that to my benefit. I was a journalism professor at the time. All worked out for me in that regard. No one filed an item 19 and gave any kind of a financial representation. And in fact, the trend was against it because, well, that's an earnings claim, and you can't make an earnings claim. So it was at least another 10, 15 years of my existence in franchising until the financial performance representation actually came around and people started using it. And you always assume if you don't have an item 19 in your disclosure, you probably have a story that you don't want to tell financially. And, this is a sign that maybe beware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially if you're an emerging brand, right, if you don't have that large proof of concept of, hundreds of franchisees especially I see a lot of emerging brands, they're under 10 stores and they're not showing anything.
Right.
If, it doesn't take much to think, right, hey, if they had good numbers, they would definitely be showing them. So why else, and there's a lot of mental gymnastics at play for what franchisors come up with why they're not sharing it. But it's usually just because of the reality of the numbers. I will say I have learned, and I've changed my stance. I'd say like a few years ago, it's pretty hard nosed and just said, if you don't have item 19, bunch of red flags. But like just to quote, and maybe it's more the exception than the rule. I'm still not sure. But for massive franchises, like I'll use Jersey Mike's as an example, they haven't shared an item 19 in years. But I have yet to meet a franchisee or someone in this community who doesn't have amazing things to say about that franchisor, and all the franchisees who are just saying, I love this brand, I'm doing well. And I think there is maybe an argument to be made that if you are that large, you can point any new prospects and just say, hey, speak to all of our franchisees. They will, and right, there's no regulatory requirements for them. They could literally show you their QuickBooks accounts and prove, right, which a franchisor would never be able to do that. They can only show past performance in the FDD. So that's my kind of like, all right, I think in reality, I'm sure Jersey Mike's is a fantastic franchise. So, but that's very different again than the emerging brand who's, still trying to prove that their concept can work in multiple markets.
And how about on that topic, and this got me off topic, but right when you said it, because I wrote a book with Fred DeLuca, co-founder of Subway. How about that deal? Work at $9 billion some dollars. And this is a franchise that, as we know, when we talk about financials, I think it's about an average of $400,000 a year out of a Subway.
Yep.
Okay. Why do people do that? What were you weren't selling those through your FSO, and you probably haven't done a deep dive on Subway.
I actually have. There's a few thoughts, like right from Rourke's perspective. I mean, it's just they've done so many massive deals. It's just fascinating, I think, to learn about their portfolio more. It was a bit. I mean, look, to me, I just thought they already own Jimmy John's. I would have thought that would have been like a deal breaker, but I guess if you own everything in the world, who cares if they're buying Jimmy John's or Subways? So maybe that's why it doesn't matter, that competitive issue. No. I would have thought that like they wouldn't have wanted it to be involved in the deal because of that, but clearly I was wrong on that. From Subway side, I have done a deep dive. I mean, they do look. They've had a pretty tumultuous past if we're analyzing it objectively. I mean, especially in the '90s, there's a lot of claims and legal documentation of a bunch of lawsuits. I remember there was one study where I think they did a sampling, or they put their franchisees through basic literacy and math tests, and like 33% of them couldn't even pass it, and it was basically immigrants
Mm-hmm.
who they didn't know. They didn't even know, they couldn't do basic math, so they absolutely didn't know what the franchise agreement was stating. And it's a tough pass, and I think they obviously have oversold locations. They've closed, thousands over the last few years, and Rourke definitely has their work cut out to kind of find a stabilizing level for the unit count in America, where franchisees don't feel like their territories are encroached on. And so, those guys can obviously turn it around. There's probably some of the most talented operators in the
Yeah,
world for
very smart
franchises.
people. At the
Yeah.
same time, on the topic of private equity, uh, I was speaking with an operator earlier in the week who said this is going to be the downfall. Private equity will be the downfall of franchising, because when private equity buys, the goal is to ramp it up some more and sell it for a bigger multiple. Okay,
Yep.
we've seen this happen. Neighborly, for example, from the Dwyer Group to Neighborly, 3 or 4 sales in there. Riverside bought them twice, as I recall. So, is this, in your mind, an issue? And this operator's point was, the franchisee is going to pay. They're going to get squeezed. Royalties will be higher. Pricing will be higher. But the franchisee is going to feel the pressure of this in order to get the EBITDA to where it needs to be by the private equity company. In order to sell for a higher multiple, they've got to perform at a higher level. How do you do that without more customers or more products or innovation? What do you think about that?
I don't know if I think it could absolutely be. I don't know if I want to say the death, but it could be a massive problem for certain franchises that get
Right.
bought out by private equity. I don't think like franchises as a whole are at risk, but it is absolutely, if you're a franchisee and your franchisor gets a major investment or a majority investment by a PE firm, then yeah, I mean, because you're right, the only way to expand that EBITDA is more unit sales to drive more royalties or get increased royalties from your existing franchisee base. And so either of those things aren't good for the franchisee, right? Because they're potentially having franchisees build in their territory or, as close as possible, or their royalty rates are going up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's not, it doesn't seem to have a fit. I have seen there are some franchisors who are owned by private equity firms that do take a much longer time horizon approach to their investments. And the sustainable way, of course, as you know, right, is help franchisees become more profitable, allow them to increase their average unit volume, and give the brand time to really build that equity with the consumer base, where it's reflected in the average unit volume. And then, of course, that's the best way for everyone to win, because the franchisor's getting more royalties, the franchisees making more money, customers love it. I think Chick-fil-A gets a lot of flack in the press for a variety of reasons, but if we just focus on the business standpoint, very slow, deliberate approach. And obviously I know that it's a very unique franchise model. I mean, we can go back to Culver's just to keep it a cleaner franchise model. You've seen their average unit volume slowly increase. And I mean, they're pumping in 3.2 million per location, right? Mm-hmm. And again, they've had that deliberate growth strategy where it started in Wisconsin with this nucleus of a location, and then they slowly have just built around there. And if you're near one Culver's, you're near others, because they don't sell a territory, hundreds of miles away. Mm-hmm. And so that's an example of and they got a minority investment from Rourke. So Rourke seems to have this longer term approach. So yeah. I think if the incentive alignment is there, it can work, but that's a big if.
So would you say that a negative of franchising, or a negative for becoming a franchisee, is you never know when your brand will be sold to private equity, and you don't know if that'll be a plus or a minus for you as a franchisee?
It's absolutely a risk. Yeah. So understanding where your franchisor is in the life cycle. I think Mathnasium's a great example, right? Bought out by none other than Rourke right. In 2020, I think. And Yeah, I've spoken to a few franchisees who aren't really thrilled with that one because they were happy. And I think Mathnasium's gone through a few investments already before that. So it is a risk. And yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to speak for all like the franchisor executives or founders out there, but I have heard from, because I've worked with emerging franchises and I've heard that question where, hey, if you guys get big and you get bought out, like I don't want that. I'm building this because I believe in you and I like the agreement we have now. But if that changes, like I'm at risk. And founders, I've heard them say like, hey, like we wouldn't do that. We would never let that happen. But I think money, like for better or worse, it does change things. People will do things that they didn't say because of money. And if you're getting life changing, I'm talking tens and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean,
right.
It's hard for people to say no and think clearly in those scenarios. So you just got to be honest about, kind of that reality.
Mm-hmm. So I usually don't do this on my podcast, but because it's you, I don't mind doing this. This is a softball. What is Crockett? You say it's a financial management data solutions platform. Okay, we're talking about financials. We're talking about sharing this financial information before you get a multi-unit buyer or even a single unit buyer. Is Crockett going to help me?
Yes. So Crockett is it's evolving as any early stage company does. Yeah. So it's a research platform. We wanted to make franchise research affordable. I kind of mentioned how that was the initial goal with my newsletter, is just shed some light on and transparency in the space. Crockett is kind of that on steroids, where instead of if you're subscribed to my free newsletter, right, you get 2 franchise breakdowns a week. And, it's great because it's free. You get the content. But Crockett's a software platform where you can sort, filter by your investment criteria, by unit count of a brand, and view the brands that match that. And then you can even download their FDDs up to 20 a month. Through building that and through working with some franchisees on the platform as beta users and getting feedback, we have kind of, if you went to our website today, it actually just went live a few hours ago. So it's funny timing. We have updated it because we now have a franchisor offering. We kind of realized to help the transparency, we almost need to help franchisors to be able to get the data. And so now Crockett, and this is becoming our core focus, is we have an API. So any franchisee can integrate their accounting software. The franchisor gets to see how their franchisees are doing line by line. And then the franchisees get to benchmark versus one another to understand how they're doing versus owners in their system. So it's and we have a few other, bells and whistles to it, but I'll spare the audience on it. But that is our focus.
Does it serve as a CRM as well?
It does not.
Okay.
We are working on CRM integrations to kind of, but our goal is to build this robust back-end data platform for franchise systems.
Okay. Is it costly?
No. I mean, it's, depends on the number of locations you have and the number of franchisees that need to integrate, but it's a small monthly amount per location that integrates into our software.
Okay. But if I have graduated 51 young people out of my program, 7 or 8 of them are now franchisees. A bunch of them work for franchise companies. Is this something a student would be able to use as they evaluate, go looking for, what do I want to invest in? Would they use Crockett?
Oh yeah, I think it would be a fantastic resource. And so we have a flat rate; it's $299 per year. But honestly, I mean, I'll say this on air because I'm happy to work something out for a student discount or something. If they're getting started, more than happy to do that. We are today the most affordable research platform for what you get, right? I mean, there are websites that charge $220 just for one FDD, and we have 2,255 franchise profiles and their FDDs all on Crockett.
Great.
So it is pretty robust, and we're trying to hit that 3,000 mark, but we'll get there soon enough.
That's great. How big is your team? You're not doing all this on your own.
Oh, no. No, I've got a lot of help, thankfully. So on the media side, I partnered with a media company called Workweek. They take a lot of the operational lift off my plate from the content side. So, podcast production, newsletter operations, and a bunch of other stuff they take care of. We have a revenue share agreement. And they came from a media background, built a successful newsletter called The Hustle, and it got acquired by HubSpot for about 25 or 30 million. So they're very talented when it comes to media, especially in the B2B world. And then Crockett, separate venture, have 4 team members, mostly on the product side, so developing and designing product, as well as some data entry for the FDD research platform.
Good. Again, you become a good resource for my students because they're going to look for opportunities. Many of them want to be in franchise development. If majority want to become franchisees eventually. So I'm happy to hear all of this, and I want to make that connection with you and them because it's part of what I do, connecting people.
Yeah.
It's a big part of my role. So Yale did this terrific study, a case study for MBAs, and got you involved at some point. How did that happen? Give us a little background.
Yeah, I just got I have a website, wolfoffranchises.com. Get a surprising amount of inbound through there, actually. And yeah, one of them just popped in and it was, hey, I'm a Yale professor, looking to get in touch with people in the franchise world. He listened to a few of the podcasts and thought I was trustworthy enough despite being an anonymous French fry. And so I took the call. We met. He's a great guy. He actually emailed me. I need to answer him. He's got another piece coming out on the FDDs. He's doing some fantastic work. And so it kind of just took on from there.
Okay, great. So part of that study and your recap of that study, which is available, of course, on your site and a terrific resource, 12 reasons why MBA students shun franchises. And, I think of it in terms because I do have MBAs, but my program is for undergraduates. They earn a concentration in franchising along with whatever degree they want, whether it's a business degree or arts and sciences degree or communications degree. If they add that concentration in franchising, 9 academic hours, they can use their electives to do it. That leverages who doesn't have a degree in marketing? I know a lot of people don't have a degree in marketing, but it seems like that's a very popular degree. And it's a good one. Marketing is terrific. My background's in marketing, but add franchise knowledge to that, and you become so desirable across the world by people who I know who are calling me constantly saying, do you have a graduate who would be interested in this position? So it's not only MBA students, it's also undergraduate students. Why would they shun franchises? For one thing, they've been told by business schools that, that's not real business. All right, one of the things you say is barrier to entry in a system as one of the reasons. Talk about that a little bit. What's that about?
Yeah, I think mainly from a capital perspective, right? A majority of franchises are gonna, the investment range will cost over $100,000, and again, some are in the millions. The bigger fast food brands and some of the fitness franchises and whatnot. But it's just it's a reality. You need the capital, and obviously there's mechanisms to acquire that capital, whether it's through a SBA loan. I've heard of folks getting really scrappy, and people who don't come from, let's say, a wealthy network, but they find people and go to conferences and find ways to get money to build and acquire their first franchises, and that kind of kickstarts them. So there's absolutely ways to work through it. There's multiple ways to skin the cat, but that's the biggest reason there. And then of course there's some secondary and tertiary ones where, depending on the size of the system, if it's a big national brand, there just simply might not be franchisees in your area who want to sell and who are ready to get out, or there might not be any available territory. But I'd say capital's just, flat out the biggest reason.
Yeah. And you list another reason why MBA students shun franchises as low perceived social impact. What's that about?
Oh, right. Yeah. So that list is actually from the actual Yale professor.
Yeah.
I believe it's more just an anecdote on that perhaps owning franchises and running them would be, wouldn't have any meaningful, fulfilling value in it. Like maybe it's purely just, okay, I can make money owning 20 gyms or restaurants or auto body shops.
Right.
But, I'm not helping society, or like this isn't going to fulfill me, or I'm not actually making a difference. But I have heard time and time again, regardless of the industry, regardless of the owner, that something that's been just super meaningful to these people is being able to build teams, employ people, take care of those people, and maybe do things that, there's obviously a lot of stuff that happens within the workplace environment across the board that sometimes employees get absolutely unfair treatment. So they get to take a stand and make the difference and treat people as they would actually like to be treated by an employer. And even just, again, the community events, the community involvement, like we mentioned Jersey Mike's before, they do a great charity day where all their sales on a given day go to a single charity. And and even just being able to promote people and, take people from who maybe started out in a location, but as your platform and your multi-unit system grows yourself, you get to turn them into managers, and you get to watch their families grow and them, build their own lifestyle. And that seems to be very fulfilling. So I would say people maybe shouldn't focus as much on like, okay, what is like the service we're providing or the product we're providing? Because there's a lot of things within any business that it can still be very fulfilling.
Yeah. Chick-fil-A sells a chicken sandwich. There's nothing magical really about that. And yet, look at the social impact of a Chick-fil-A operator, a fellow who is right here in West Palm Beach, been here since, before the Titus Center was launched. We're in our 7th year, but I think he's been around. Rob has been here for maybe a dozen years. As a result of him recruiting employees for his 2 Chick-fil-A's at Palm Beach Atlantic University, more than 1,000 of our students have worked with him. And 19 of them have become Chick-fil-A operators because of him. He puts them through their leadership program and promotes them to Atlanta as good candidates. Chick-fil-A gets something like 90,000 applicants a year, and they select under 100 people. So we've had 19 of our university graduates.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
statistically, that's an anomaly.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Another franchise on my advisory board, as is Chick-fil-A on my advisory board. And we're very, very fortunate that Dan Cathy, the chairman, son of the founder, lives locally to our university. And some mornings he gives you a call or texts me and says, what time's your class? I'd like to drop by. So can you imagine you got Dan Cathy walking into your classroom, which we love, but if the news gets out, I don't have enough seats in my classroom whenever it goes up. Yeah. So there's great social impact there. Another member of my advisory board is Meals of Hope, based in Naples, Florida. Young, emerging franchise. They feed, their role is to eradicate hunger in America. And they pack meals. We're going to do a meal packing event on our campus sponsored by Meals of Hope in a couple of months. This is why this is important today. The Gen Zs, and a lot of people think they're dumb or they're lazy or they're not creative or they're entitled. Well, I teach Gen Zs. I've got 21 of them right now in Principles of Franchising. One of them is already a franchisee. 3 or 4 of them in our preliminary discussions already have it mapped out. One's going to be a franchisor, hopes to be. Others are going to be franchisees. These are not lazy, dumb kids. And they are the future of the country. And number one for them, if there's not social impact in the business, I don't care what it is, don't count on me. I don't even want the job. Unless the job has socially redeeming value, I don't want the job. So it's important today for franchisors to recognize this. You've got to make a difference in the community at least, or in a church, or in schools. It doesn't have to be worldwide, but that's where these young people are today. I'm very enthusiastic about them.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to kind of see as each generation kind of shows the world really what's important to them as a whole. And it's absolutely something franchisors should be thinking about. And it's actually funny what you said earlier too, about, some people think maybe they're lazy or they're this or they're that. I almost think, I think it's like a generational thing where a certain segment of each generation as they grow up, they kind of just get a bad taste in their mouth from the emerging generation. I remember seeing on Twitter a newspaper, like pictures of old newspapers, and it was, forgive me, I don't even remember, I don't know the name of the generation before baby boomers, but it was that generation saying, oh, baby boomers are entitled. They think that, they don't work hard and they're not going to do this or that. And then like today, it's like the baby boomers seem to be, oh, Gen Z this, or millennials, right? I mean, I got a lot of jokes about, hey, like, you want a participation trophy? It's like, hey, we didn't invent that. You guys gave it to us. So, but anyway, it's just funny how it happens.
Yeah. All right. Then reasons why MBA students should consider franchising. You have some comments. You have 12 reasons for that. Proven business model. Some people think that's a negative. Why is that so important that it's a proven business model?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go off that Culver's example, right? I mean, it's about risk. And if you're starting a business, you want to be around in 5 years, 10 years. You want that return on the investment. And to know that it works in multiple markets, it shows that, there is a playbook here that the franchisor has, that they can also transfer that knowledge to other people so that they can build their own success. And then there's kind of system-wide benefits that occur as more and more people come in, which is that brand value where, Culver's today now versus 10 years ago and 20 years ago, more people know it. And you're just more likely to get people walking into your door because of literally the name on your restaurant, which again, if you start out from scratch with your own brand or franchise with 2 locations, which there's tons of merit to do that, but you don't have that brand recognition. So there's things that come with it.
And you've added to that, no need for a great idea. Is it true you're going to be successful if you follow a good franchisor's system and you don't have to create the next hamburger or whatever it might be?
Yes. And the key there is obviously, as you phrased it, a good franchise system. There's absolutely work to be done, right, though, in especially for like a brick and mortar brand, picking a good location. I had a Zaxby's operator who was just talking about the importance of real estate that he's found within that fast food landscape where, his saying was you could pick a location once, you could pay for a location once, or you can pay for it every single day. Meaning if you don't pick a good location, you're going to pay for that all the time because you just can't. It does put a ceiling on your revenue depending on the concept. So he has no problem paying the higher dollars for a prime location because that's the game he's playing in the fast food world. Is a lot of times it's about, all right, I'm jumping off the highway. Zaxby's is the first one versus the KFC down the street. Boom. Zaxby's is getting a lot more business because of that. And so there's still work to be done. But, generally speaking, if you pick that right franchise, you're in a really good position.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Wolf, we're right up against the time. I appreciate you so much. I'm a great fan. I turn my students on to you as well. At some point, we need to you need your French fry costume, and then we can get you in the classroom as well.
Yes. I can. I could make a cameo in a costume, but John, this was a lot of fun. Appreciate you inviting me on, and I mean it's cool to be on the show. Obviously, you're quite a legend in the franchise world, so thanks again for the invite.
Well, thank you. God bless you and all the work you and your team are doing, and look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely, John.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.